Time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good afternoon, all. Craig, I really did want to talk a little bit about local politics. Both of you all live in the state of Maryland, and as we all know, the very popular Larry Hogan is stepping down after being termed out. And so it's a totally new campaign. And we have, I believe, 8 Democrats, and many of them coming from remarkable backgrounds, I have to say. And then we have the interesting element of Larry Hogan's successor, and whether that moderate Republican candidacy might still be attractive. And what's your take as we start this new beginning?
I'm glad you've asked. It caused me to dig a little deeper and learn a little bit more. Yes, I live in Maryland. I have been a Hogan supporter. I have not endorsed nor donated to any of the candidates running this time around. And so it was kind of a chance to take a look. I've enjoyed the spy interviews, of course, that you're conducting, which I think is very valuable. I guess I look at it as, first of all, I think it should be said that the candidates who seem to have the most solid organizations at this point in time, hard to know who's going to win, but the most solid organizations all seem to be pretty responsible people. It looks to me like Maryland will find a governor who's probably got pretty good experience, and he or she will come into office focused on issues that people in this state relate to, which are jobs and education and healthcare, and it just feels like the candidates running are pretty solid to me. I do think that probably the biggest question is whether voters in Maryland want to go for a name that's been long familiar and served in public office for a good many years, or whether they'd like to try something new. The political pundits, certainly out of Washington, tend to suggest that Maryland leans Democratic in this gubernatorial contest, and certainly Hogan had a particularly fine run at maintaining support across the board in the state as a Republican, and that's hard to transfer. Maybe I'll start there, which is he's endorsed one of the Republicans, Kelly Schultz, served in 2 different cabinet positions in his administration, comes out of Frederick, has been a delegate, clearly has very solid executive branch experience, probably gets the opportunity to tap into the Hogan fundraising machine and organization machine, 2 of the most important elements, I think, in any race. And so I think I'd say that you have to consider her, and at least I would consider her, to be perhaps in a stronger position, to win a primary on July 19th, whether that translates into general election support, the likes of which Hogan had. It really depends on the kind of campaign she runs. I don't think that transfers automatically. I do think his endorsement is a big advantage in a primary effort. On the Democratic side, I really should let Al talk more about this, but I do think this is where you have some interesting choices, because you have a Democrat in Peter Franchot, who's been state comptroller. First of all, people have to learn what a comptroller actually does, but his name is familiar. He's run statewide races. He's been very visible, very present. We see him here on the Eastern Shore with some regularity. Seems very solid to me, very committed, and is I'm sure capable of running a very solid campaign. The other well-known name there is Tom Perez, a United States Secretary of Labor, as well as a Democratic National Committee Chairman. Al can tell us a little bit more about him, but pretty big name, big national recognition. Certainly Washingtonians know him well, so I'd look for him to probably do well. But the one who interests me the most, and maybe we'll come back and talk more about him, is Wes Moore. Here's here's a member of the US Army, a CEO of a not-for-profit organization. He's raised more money nationally and raised more money in Maryland than the other candidates, has a strong war chest. And while his name recognition is low, he's still polling, I think, 10% or more. And in a Democratic race where nobody's much over Peter Franchot at 23%. So I think that's wide open. And I think somebody new and fresh is somebody I'd watch pretty carefully, I think.
Al, do you have that same sense? It is kind of extraordinary to see the number of really well qualified people running on the Democratic side. And I'm kind of curious if you think that's a good thing or not.
It's always good to have a lot of good candidates running on your side. Give the voters a real choice. Like Craig, I've not endorsed nor given money personally to any of the candidates. We've got a July 19th primary, and to be honest with you, I mean, I don't disagree with a lot of what Craig said about the Democratic field, but I don't think the race has gelled very much at all. My experience in Maryland races is that about the 1st of June, people will start to really focus on this race. And one of the indications that they're not focusing is there was a poll done in January for one of the candidates, and then the one that Craig mentioned, which was done, I think, last month for one of the candidates. And there's basically no movement, which indicates, and there's also about a 25% undecided. And with a whole list of candidates, that's a pretty large undecided. And what it means is that nobody is really focused on the race. Nobody's really taken off. In many ways, I do think it is what Craig said. It's if the voters want a newcomer or whether they want somebody who's been around a long time. I mean, Peter Franchot, the controller, has a lot of money. He's got what I would call a weak lead, 23%, because he's run statewide 4 times. So he should have a very large name recognition advantage. The person who's second is an interesting candidate who Craig did not mention, Rashern Baker, who was the former Prince George's County executive. Prince George's County is the biggest Democratic voting or most Democratic county in the state. He's an African-American and he's run statewide, but that may not be to his advantage because he lost the Democratic primary last time for governor. Craig mentioned Tom Perez, and Tom Perez does okay. He's got a good name recognition. He's actually been Maryland Secretary of Labor and U.S. Secretary of Labor, so he has Maryland background. But the thing that I found really interesting, I looked at the endorsements for the various candidates, and you've got to go a whole column on Perez before you get somebody from Maryland. He's a national candidate. And my experience is that people who are well known in Washington and that we tend to think, you know, they're really going to have a chance, don't have much of a chance because they don't really focus, they're really not identified in the state. And the final main candidate, there are others, but is Wes Moore, who's the head of the Robin Hood Foundation, an Army veteran. He's new. He's very, very impressive. And he's picked up a couple of really important endorsements. He picked up Stuart Pittman, who's the county executive in Anne Arundel, which is a growing and key voting constituency. And he picked up the endorsement of the current Prince George's County executive, which may in the end hurt Baker a little bit. He's also the only candidate from the Baltimore area. And while Baltimore City isn't the dominant force it used to be in Maryland politics, it's still very important. And if he reaches out into Baltimore County, it should be very helpful. He's got the endorsements of the teachers union, which is a very important endorsement in Democratic primary politics. And Wes Moore is a young, attractive person who I think, as an African-American, will do very well among moderate white voters. So I would really watch him very closely. But as I said, the race hasn't gelled. And I suspect if we talk 60 days from now, you'd start to see some real movement.
You know, the other thing I wanted to bring up with both of you is that there is a Trump endorsed candidate. Dan Cox is Donald Trump's selection. And I was hearing some commentary the other day about how surprisingly risky Trump has been using his endorsements, not always picking those who are going to win and not really worried about his political capital. He just does it. I mean, you saw some interesting trends with that, and that could be applied to Maryland?
That's an interesting question. I thought we might get through this without mentioning that person's name, but Donald Trump seems to be more interested in rewarding people that stay with him. It's an interesting calculation. I don't know how politically astute it is, but he puts money behind people who are for him. And I think in some ways it probably, or it may intimidate others that just don't want to have him, come out for another candidate, regardless of what the chance may be of winning. Maryland doesn't seem to me to be a place where the Trump vote is going to be a big factor, even in a Republican primary. There certainly are strong supporters. I know strong supporters here on the Eastern Shore, but I don't know as you go throughout the state that that's going to be have a big effect. And I would go back and reiterate what Al said. I do think this is very much open. In fact, the reality of having a statewide candidate who's won twice, Peter Franchot, and if he has 23% of the vote, 25% are undecided, but literally 77% are looking somewhere besides him. He says he's quietly confident. And that would be a cause for concern. And that's, of course, in the general election, well, in the primary election initially, but I just wonder whether that race is gelled. I, for one, think that Hogan's candidate probably is far better off with Hogan's support than Trump's candidate with Trump's support.
Al, you have the last word this week.
I agree with Craig on the Hogan versus Trump. Hogan's been a very popular governor. This race overall, as Craig mentioned right at the beginning, most of the people who look at state races have it either leaning Democratic, and in one case, Larry Sabato of the University of Virginia, I think he has it, a solid Democratic state, and it should be a Democratic state. But even Maryland is not completely averse to national trends. And I saw a poll, this recent poll that was done, I think, at Goucher on the issues involved. And the issues, crime is the #1 issue in the state. And inflation affects a majority of the voters. Some of the national trends may cut into the natural proclivity of Marylanders to vote Democratic. To be honest with you, I think that all helps Wes Moore, because I think looking for a new voice and a fresh candidate. But the other thing is Hogan's approval ratings are high. They're higher than Biden's. Biden's are better in Maryland, incidentally, than they are nationwide. He's slightly positive in Maryland. So I guess what I think is that in the end, we'll probably see, if I had to guess, and Lord knows, tape this and hold me to it, and I'll look like a fool in 4 months. But I would guess it's going to be Wes Moore against Kelly Schultz, neither of whom are very well known at this moment. And if Wes Moore turns out to be a good candidate, and you don't know with somebody who's never run before when they really get into the hardcore times of the campaign, the dog days of the campaign, I think Wes Moore has a chance to become the next governor, a very good chance, and I believe our first African-American governor.
We have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We'll talk to you next week.